Here's something that everyone has considered at least once in their life, but should really be considering all of the time. How amazing is it that you are alive today and not in the past? I mean, obviously, unless you were born right this very second, you were also alive in the past. But I'm talking the past, the history past. Boy, oh boy, was that a shit time to be alive. And I mean all of it. Literally all of it. I would very strongly argue that if you genuinely wish that you were living in a different historical period to the past of the current historical period, you either have not thought that through very well, or you're just a very special person. And it's not that I can't see the appeal, because I can. A lot of interesting things happened over the course of history. A lot of places in time were definitely worth a visit. Massive orgies in ancient Rome, righteous fights for democracy in the French Revolution, and being in New Orleans when jazz was being born. And it's not always necessarily the historicity of those events that make them exciting. Many people wouldn't go to what we refer to as the Wild West because of its modern historical context, but because simply the life there would be different to them in a way that is appealing as an escape from the world that we exist in today. And if I did have access to a simulation that could transport me to one of these historical periods for like a week so I could vacation there, I would definitely do it. But I would do it for the same reason why I'd watch a horror film, or why I'd play a video game where I need to save the whole galaxy. Neither of the two are actual situations that I genuinely would want to find myself in. But it is fun to vacation there in the context of being able to return. Because there's a lot of stuff that was back there, and also a lot of stuff that wasn't back there that I could really not live with and or without. One of these things, some would argue the most important, would be toilets and showers. I mean, do you realize how disgusting humans were up until the point where these things existed and were in regular use? I shower every day, otherwise I just get disgusted with myself. You know how sometimes you will just run into a person on the street or at uni, at the supermarket, and they just reek because they have not showered in a week. It used to be that's what almost everyone was like almost all of the time. Be happy that you cannot smell Game of Thrones. Speaking of entertainment media that is set in the past or a past analogous setting, here's a thing that they will generally just ignore in their quest to achieve realism. The teeth! The majority of people having decent, if not pretty good teeth, and the majority of people being able to keep their teeth until late in life, and sometimes even for their entire life, that's a fairly recent development. This is not to say that in the past dental hygiene wasn't a thing at all, because it certainly was. But there were a lot of dental problems that people just had no idea how to deal with. They couldn't do anything about them. And so it was not unusual that someone would have lost all of their teeth by their mid-20s. It wasn't super common, but it did happen. Don't even talk to me about braces. Straight teeth, just naturally perfectly straight teeth back in the day were so rare that they increased your market value by enormous amounts. Those are basically just standard for us. We complain about minor deviations in how the teeth are aligned. I mean, there is a reason why we cut this stuff out of entertainment. Medicine has made enormous strides. Just like a huge amount, almost half of kids used to die before they reached adulthood. That was a normal thing back in the day. Until not so long ago, just having an open wound that you got from some mundane injury while you were standing around at the river and slipped had the potential to get infected and kill you. Nowadays, not only is it much easier to not get that stuff infected because, you know, there's a lot of less infectious materials around, a lot of materials are just not as dirty. You can just put something on there that isn't itself laden with bacteria. Even if it does get infected, you can go to professionals for free in most countries that are civilized, and they will have a whole catalog of options to deal with that problem, and most of them are not cut off the whole limb. But let's get super recent and talk about the internet. The average peasant in the 15th century processed about as much data in their entire lifetime as some of us do in a day. Just consider the amount of information that you are exposed to every single second. The amount of stuff that you have to pass in your brain, the amount of things you need to know and you need to consider and you need to think about. I am addicted to learning new stuff. I have a window in my browser that's got like 20 tabs open at all times that are just random Wikipedia articles about subjects where at some point I just passed them into Google and thought, hey, should probably research this, and I regularly clear that ball. I need the knowledge and I need it instantly. Even if all of that same information had been available at the time, just the method of retrieval alone makes such a huge difference. You could buy an encyclopedia. I mean, you can still buy an encyclopedia. Do you know how expensive those motherfuckers are? It's just tons of books that the richest of the rich, like scholars, university professors, people like that for whom that was an investment, they bought encyclopedias. People who really valued education. And the thing is, they were outdated fairly quickly, so that the hundreds and thousands of dollars you gave out last year to get a whole rack of books that will destroy your shelf eventually, probably now not worth half of that because most of the information in there is outdated. Now it's all of the knowledge, always up to date, completely for free. Just imagine how valuable that is to have. Or also just interest-sharing communities. That's become a whole lot easier, very fast. Probably a lot of people on this planet that are very interested in studying the specific history of individual Thai spices in a number of centuries that were during the medieval period. However, there's so few of them compared to the population and to the distribution of the population that chances are no two of them will ever bump into each other. Except now, everyone who has an interest in that topic can just hang out in a place that is accessible to everyone on the entire planet at any time. They don't need anyone to introduce them to it. They can just find it because they find themselves interested in it. Take a moment to appreciate how monumental this is. I couldn't even imagine watching TV. That shit is way too boring. And I know a lot of you are saying, ooh, burger, but the only reason you would miss running hot water and access to Wi-Fi so much is because you are from a time period where both of these things exist, and if you didn't know about them, you probably wouldn't miss them as much. And that is true. I am indeed a person who knows and has experienced hot running water and also Wi-Fi and the internet and all of those things. And who knows, maybe if I had been born in a previous period of time, I wouldn't miss them. But I do know that right now I miss technologies that will only be developed in the future. They terrify me also, of course, but I mean, so does the past. Most of the time when I think about the amazing feats we will one day be able to achieve, I get melancholic for a time that is happening without me. To assume that people in the past didn't also feel this way is just absurd. But that's not really what this video is about either. It's really more about appreciating what we do have. And I'm coming at this from a perspective of the worst I would miss is the internet. Because boy oh boy did I win the historical lottery. I am a straight white male. This is a fact. I know that has been over-politicized to death, and if you look at the numbers, it really isn't that much of an advantage anymore, but it sure used to be. Imagine being a black man in the US in the 80s even. Just the overt racism that still existed, not localized, but just everywhere. You would probably remember a time where there was actual segregation. Imagine being gay or trans in a time period where just nobody accepted that shit. Which, you know, historically there have been time periods where both of these things were accepted. There are areas in the world that are super backwards in terms of these things. But at least if you are there, you have the possibility, sometimes, to go to a place that is the most of the rest of the world, and their people will accept you for who you are. This used to just not be the case. But, you know, politically speaking, things have gotten a whole lot better. Because yes, while being a straight white male would have the advantage of not disadvantaging me in any way in terms of most of history, at least, you know, European history, it also wouldn't have necessarily advantaged me particularly because statistically speaking, I would have been born a peasant. And don't get me wrong, I would much rather be a peasant than be a slave. But also, I wouldn't want to be a peasant, really. This is a huge fallacy that a lot of people who want to go back in time fall victim to. They see themselves as kings and knights and explorers and shit. You'd be a peasant. Unless you were born to extremely rich parents today, you would be a peasant in the past as you are a peasant today. It's just that today being a peasant isn't all that bad anymore. Today it can be difficult to get into the upper classes if you started out poor. It can get really difficult depending on where you live. Back then, for the overwhelming majority of times and places in history, it was almost impossible. You had to be extremely exceptional and ultra fucking lucky to get anywhere. This is exactly the same as with people who are into like the zombie apocalypse, seeing themselves as survivors. 98% of humanity is zombies. Probably, chances are, you also, 98%, would be a zombie. Of course, that's not narratively interesting, which is why we do not make television shows about a pack of zombies wading through the swamp for several months. And even in like Game of Thrones, if you think about it, the overwhelming majority of the characters, and I think all of the main characters, are the analog to the 1% of today. These people are the billionaires and the superstars of their time. They are not average at all. And all of this makes me wonder, people in the future, how will they look back at today and think to themselves, oh, Jesus Christ, that was a really shit time. I'm happy that I didn't have to suffer through that. Well, just having to go to work to acquire resources to survive and living below the poverty line if you don't in like Western societies with social safety nets, will that be seen as analogous to the way we today see people in the Industrial Revolution basically being slaves in these huge unhealthy factories, toiling their bodies away for next to nothing? When nanomachines give everyone like a perfect physique and everyone is always taught and can eat whatever the fuck they want, will it be that they look back at our imperfect bodies today and think to themselves the same things that we think about people who used to have bad teeth? Because that's just all they could have. And which parts of our time would they be interested in experiencing? Just the ability to disappear off the grid, or the probably relative anonymity compared to their time period, might be appealing to some of them, much like being in the past and living on a farm without fucking artificial lighting and with candles and all that is appealing to many people today because of its simplicity. Because you don't have to worry about paying taxes. I mean, you do have to worry about paying taxes back then. Taxes were a thing back then. It just was a lot less complicated. Because the way we experience history is relative, but also always the same. Every point in history was at some point the present. Right now is always the time that is. People in the past didn't think of themselves as living in the past, and people in the future will not think of themselves as living in the future. I know this is a very obvious statement to make, because it is, but I feel like a lot of the time we just fail to appreciate what that actually means. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share it to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Le Patreon, join my Discord server, follow me on Twitter. And in that spirit, be happy for being able to live in the time period that you're able to live in. And if you do experience any of these horrible things, especially in a political sense, know that there is a chance that you can get out of it, depending on what your current specific situation is. And see you around, cunts.